Welcome to the Business of Story, where we connect you with the leading minds in the art of business storytelling. Learn from best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, makers, content marketers, and brand raconteurs on how to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. The Business of Story is brought to you by Emma, which provides innovative email marketing tools and services that drive brilliant results. And by Convince and Convert, digital marketing advisors and counselors to leading brands and organizations worldwide. Convince and Convert helps you gain and keep your customers online. Here's your host, Park Howell.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Business of Story. Park Howell here. And before we get into it, I got to tell you, I just had the greatest time this morning. John Jantz of Duct Tape Marketing invited me to come and do the kickoff workshop for his session today, his Cultivate seminar, where he has his community of agencies in town in Scottsdale from all around the country, literally around the world. We had a mate in there from London today, and I had the distinct pleasure of doing a 90-minute workshop to show these folks how story is more important now than ever to rise above the noise of the attention economy, how it works on our brains, and able to share our intentional story cycle system with them so that they could use it first, not only to own their own personal and professional stories for their agencies, but then how they could train their clients how to use it. It is an amazing added value, not only in the power of the communication that you are able to create for yourself and on behalf of your clients, but the clients are so appreciative when they learn how they can use this. I mean, it just was so much fun, and it was a great audience, and I got a chance to meet our wonderful producer, Jess Ostroff, in person for the very first time. Yeah, that's right. Been working together for the last 14, 15 months. I've produced like 65 shows. She is out on the East Coast. I'm here in Arizona. So we finally got a chance to say hello and get acquainted and meet some of her amazing staff at Don't Panic Management. So I'm just really pumped. It's great energy bringing in to this show today with Buddy Scalera. Now, who's Buddy Scalera, you might say? Well, you know the promise I make all of you, and it's the same promise I made to the group this morning too, that I am here to reignite within you the one true superpower that we all possess, and that's the power of story, to nudge the world in any direction we choose. And so this guest is more appropriate than ever to talk about this power of the superpower of story, because he comes to us from the comic book world. I mean, this guy has written in the Deadpool franchise series. He has an amazing amount of books under his belt, and he's in the pharmaceutical marketing industry. So he's a sought-after content marketing expert. He just spoke at Content Marketing World, and he is one of the most entertaining guests. I just had such a great time with Buddy on the show. So I'm so excited to bring him to you. Now, why this is important for you is because it gives us a chance to get out of our business heads and into our emotional brain and have some fun from the comic book world and how we can use some of their story ideals and their story structure to humanize and have more fun with our own content marketing, really any kind of marketing, business storytelling we have to do. So in today's show, Buddy's going to do a lot of things for us. He's going to show us how to use business storytelling to give people a reason to do something, to act, to make a behavior change. And I got a hint for you. It doesn't have to do with talking about all the data all the time. We got to give them an emotional reason to do something. He's going to share with us how he does that and how he's been effective with it. Also, we are going to learn from the Spider-Man movie, the second Spider-Man movie, how to create more cliffhangers in our marketing so that we can enthrall our audiences and keep them around for the next episode of our brand story. And finally, amongst many other things you're going to learn about, you're going to learn the 3 things that Buddy learned from writing the 56th edition of Deadpool series. You know, this is the 56th comic book in the Deadpool series, that great movie. If you saw it, it's hysterical. Well, he wrote the 56th edition, and he had a real awakening aha moment. He's going to share that with us, and the 3 things he learned from that process that he uses in his marketing, and you and I can do it too. So let's jump right into the wacky comic book world, the pharma marketing world of Buddy Scalera. Hey, Buddy, man, welcome to Business of Story. Great having you here.
I'm very excited, Park. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to get completely stereotypical here. So look at your buddy Scalera from Jersey, and you have this front of being in the comic book business. Now, what's really going on, man? Come clean with our listeners.
So thanks for letting me join your show. I'm super excited. I'm a fan. I'm a listener. And I listen to your show because I'm a content strategist working in pharmaceutical and healthcare by day, and then by night I throw on a different hat and I tell stories on a deadline because I am a comic book writer and comic book educator. So that's the story of Buddy from New Jersey.
So is this a Clark Kent thing you've got going? Pharma guy by day, comic book dude by night? Is that what's going on?
It kind of is, actually. You know, you say that, but it's not far off from the truth. I hid my secret identity as a comic book writer for many, many years because I was afraid that people might not take what I do seriously, but the resurgence in interest in comics, and it's kind of in the zeitgeist right now. So I merged the two of them together, and I use my my background as a comic book writer, as a visual storyteller, to tell better stories in content marketing and in healthcare.
All right, so let's get to your backstory. How did you get into this cross-section, this intersection of the comic book world and the pharma world? Take us back to where it all started.
So I was in college. I was studying journalism, and I was going to save the world with journalism. And this is back in the dark ages before the internet. And one of my journalism major friends said he was interning at Marvel Comics, and it blew me away. I didn't know you could work at Marvel Comics, and he said sure, and he brought comic books back from the internship, and he hooked me on comics in my senior year of college, and I thought, this is great. And when I graduated, I became a local beat reporter, just covering the news in newspapers, and in my free time I would pitch magazines and even the newspaper to write features about what was going on in comics, and for the most part, they let me do it, but I really had my focus on becoming a comic book professional, and I broke in the fan press, what we call the fan press, as a journalist, and and I got hired on a publication, and they hired me. This is going back many, many years ago. They said, we want you to start our online division, and I had never even heard of that, and I remember telling my mother how excited I was, like, Mom, I'm going to be working online with email, and she's like, what line, what mail? And when they hired me, Park, they only had budget for one, so they sent me back to school to learn how to code. I was a liberal arts major, right? So I didn't know anything about writing code, and they sent me this little company out down south that was called America Online, and they would have code classes, and they taught us how to code, and we created one of the very first fan communities on America Online, and a lot of the marketing and community techniques I learned there. This is early social. And then eventually I was interested in doing different things with my career. And then when my wife and I decided to have children, we decided we needed really good health benefits. So I went from working on Deadpool, the Merc with the mouth, to working at Merck. Literally, that was the jump. And I started working in pharmaceutical. What they were interested in was somebody who could write for the medium. Digital medium and websites were a new thing. And they said, look, we'll send you back to school and teach you all about health. So kind of went full circle and took my digital writing, and they taught me about health, and I became a consumer health copywriter, and that's how I started my career. And I've been having a sort of a main career in marketing and in content marketing and in healthcare for the past 15 or so years, or 16 years, but I've always maintained a small foot in the comic book industry. And in the past couple of years, I just sort of came out and let people know that I do both things. And now I'm able to overlay, like a little Venn overlay of comic books, visual storytelling, and content marketing on the web.
That's incredible. Now, buddy, most people, when they need to have health insurance, they don't make a full shift into the pharmaceutical industry. They go out and they find an agent and they buy some. But was it sort of soul sucking in any kind of way to leave this really fun, I would imagine, entertaining, creative world of the comic book world and have to go into pharma?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that I think that people have an idea about comics and the medium that may be part of our own fiction. It is just like any other publishing. It's a deadline-driven, focused. You have to get books to the printer, and writing licensed characters, the ones that'll be on bed sheets and the ones that'll be on T-shirts, is really very, very, you could mambo in a phone booth. I mean, it's very restrictive, and you learn how to deal with properties and all of the restrictions and requirements, because there's millions of dollars at stake. So, learning to write for comics, and it's a very restrictive format in terms of page count and length. It's, you don't, it's not like a movie, if they need 91 minutes of a movie, they go to 91 minutes, In comics, it's 22 pages, and that's it. And you have to work with licensed characters. So it was very restrictive, but I was always very, very interested in health and in science and the things that went into, taking, the science behind drugs and treatment. And I found that fascinating. So to me, it was super exciting to move into pharma because I got to learn about that stuff firsthand. And then I actually utilized it in my comic book work because, you can cross-pollinate knowledge that you learn in one area into the stories that you tell, in comics. So it was actually kind of awesome. I never actually felt restricted at all.
Well, I got to tell you, I did something similar, but I mean, I'm not sure how effective it was, other than it really brought the house down at a big convention. And I brought some cartoon animation into a video, a probiotic video. So it was about this train to Bowel Town. And we load the train up full of, these little characters that represent the probiotics. And they essentially are going into like a World War II zone. Bowel Town is under siege by all of these awful characters that are attacking it. And of course, they show up and they save the day. And we have a clean colon all for the thanks of it. And I believe me, not in the cartoon world, the comic book world, but we were told you got to figure out how do we communicate this to a universe or to an international audience. So we had people from 140 different countries in there, and we had to tell this all through the Train to Bowel Town video, and I laugh at myself. Now, I'm going to have to find a link to that and put it into our show notes. But it's, to me, you working in the comic book world and the pharma world, to me, could not be further apart in messaging. Where do you find the similarities? How do you bridge those two worlds to and have both of those worlds inform each other? How does the pharma world make you a better storyteller in the comic book world, and vice versa?
Well, hey, no, I'm glad that you brought that up. There are, when we think about how do we motivate patients, one of the classic examples, for instance, is how do you motivate someone who has a health condition like type 2 diabetes, and how do you get them to stay compliant with their medications? Well, you give them a reason. You can try to tell them, eat better or eat less or do this or don't do that. And some of these things are so punitive and that they can't really contextualize it. And the example that you might give is you have to give them a reason to want to be compliant. If you want to dance at your daughter's wedding, you're going to want to do these things starting 6 months from that date. And you work toward that date. And what you do is you create a narrative, you create a story that's not rooted in numbers or what you should or should be doing or what you shouldn't have eaten. Those aren't the things that motivate people. People are the heroes of their own story. And what we do is give them a reason to want to take care of their health. And I think that's really important because it's easy when you can say, well, we're going to give people this new technology like a Fitbit, and they're going to proactively train for a marathon. And that's great. I think that's super awesome for many, many people who are proactively taking care of their health. But, in pharma, we're often dealing with people who are sick, right? We're dealing in sickness, not necessarily in wellness. And sometimes it's not their fault. It's nothing that they did that caused it. And sometimes there are actions that they can take to better manage their health. And we have to find in the narrative something that will motivate and resonate with them. And remember, we're not dealing with one person. Those stories have to resonate with any number of people, right? We have the patient, and maybe there's a caregiver, and there's a primary care physician, and perhaps there's nursing staff. And if they go into the hospital now, suddenly you have all kinds of other people, and there are so many different people who have to be part of the same narrative. And you have to find the story that resonates with them. And, sometimes it's the numbers. As a journalist, I kept a rule of thumb for myself. If the numbers is the story, lead with the numbers. But usually the story is something else. And usually the numbers reference something else. So journalistically, we find a story, we can apply it in healthcare, and we can discover the story that will motivate people. So I think it actually all ties together. You mentioned in one of your recent podcasts, features and benefits. And I think features and benefits matters in certain scenarios. And then sometimes it's just that story that clicks with somebody and makes them want to take care of their health.
Yeah, well, I just wrote down this line when you were talking about that is someone's sick, they're dealing with something, they don't necessarily connect with the data, so you got to get them to live into something. I wrote down here, you take fact and get people to live into a fiction. And what I mean by that is you had said, I love how you project this, if you want to dance at your daughter's wedding. Well, that is down the road, and so it's a fiction at this point because it hasn't actually happened, and yet our brains really can connect with that because it gives them, like you said, a reason. It uses story to give them a reason to get there. And I think pharma is a good example of it when you're dealing with any industry where expertise is at play. It seems like we like to default to the expertise, the data, versus the drama of what does it all truly mean. So it sounds like you are doing a nice job of being able to bring that drama into pharma. And I would imagine it's got to be a pretty ripe industry that your competition maybe isn't doing it the way you're approaching it. Is that so? Oh,
it's interesting. Yeah, I love the way you bring the data in. I think data matters for some audiences, and that will motivate them. And telling the science and or repeating the science is safe. In pharma, we have a lot of rules. It's a highly regulated industry. We have to find something other than numbers to get somebody to take care of themselves or just be compliant with what their doctor recommends. And, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of fiction out there. Misinformation is much, much more widespread than you would realize. There's a lot of misinformation about health out there. And pharma brands and healthcare professionals have to work against this fiction, which pops up in everybody's Facebook stream, every Twitter stream, Google searches and results. There's a lot of health misinformation out there. So not only are we dealing with having to help people understand the facts and the truth behind health, we have to sometimes undo a fiction that has propagated online in ways that, are really hard to undo. So I think, finding the story that motivates people and helps them to make sense of data in their lives and what it really means to them, I think the industry is moving toward that much more aggressively. We are in the early stages of having the right names, the right vernacular for content marketing, and that's all about storytelling and a form of storytelling. It's not about talking at people. It's about giving them a reason. Because, you've mentioned in this other podcast, storytelling is about a hero and a conflict. And sometimes a brand is a solution to that conflict. And I think that's one of the reasons why this, your podcast, The Business Story, is so valuable. Because you're helping an entire generation of marketers realize that it is no longer 2001. We can't get people just by blasting ads at them. We have to give them something that makes sense to them and their lives.
And to that point about tension, without tension, you have no story. So certainly in the comic book world, It's all about creating that tension. But, in the marketing world, it's the same thing because you can't sell into status quo and without some sort of market tension or a need of some sort that the brand responds to, we're just kind of out there floating around. So how do you approach a story in the most simplest of ways? And what I mean by that is, buddy, you are given, a deadline or you're given a project, and whether it's in the pharma world or the comic book world, and say, all right, now start shaping a story around this. What are just some of the simplest things you do to get your mind sort of warmed up to start thinking in and working through story and story structure?
I start with the question why. I ask why are we doing what we're doing? A lot of people will bring me in because I specialize in visual storytelling, and they'll bring me in. And this is, again, I just switched from the agency side for 9.5 years, and now I'm over on the brand side. But the process is more or less the same. We're asking, why are we providing information and or content for our audience? What behavior change do we want from them, right? We don't want to just inform them. For years, the advertising and marketing industry was expert at reporting how well they were at delivering message, but they didn't necessarily have a measurement for behavior change, right? You get tons of junk mail, either in your inbox or in your physical mailbox. It doesn't mean that your behavior changed. So we start by saying, what's the behavior change? And then we try to figure out who the persona is. And you have to kind of break it down. As I noted earlier, you could have lots of personas around a single brand. And that's true in pharma and in any sort of scenario where you have a product. It means different things to different people, from retail to packaging to distributors to end consumer to the sales associates. Just about everybody has a story, and a product or a brand should mean something to those people. And we've tried to figure out now their learning journey. This is really important because you have to say everybody's on a learning journey. It's not a funnel. The funnel concept is old and broken and doesn't work anymore. A user journey says, what would that person want to know early in their journey? What would that person want to know further along in their journey? And that what does that person need to know if they're ready to make a decision? Then ultimately, when they become your customer, what do they need to know? Brands want to create one message. They want the December message. And that's not how people think. People think, I have a problem, i.e. a conflict, and I need to solve that. And maybe your brand solves that conflict. And I think what you have to do is put yourself in the shoes of that user and what they're going through. It's very similar to writing comics. When you're thinking about the hero and what they have to accomplish, there's usually a barrier. And one of the classic ones was in the Spider-Man movie, the second Spider-Man movie. Peter Parker had to get medication to Aunt May, and she was one side of, across town, and then Dr. Octopus is tearing the city apart. That's a conflict, right? He has to figure out a way to solve that conflict. Now, it was an action movie, but the same thing exists. You have a person who wants or needs something, reaches a conflict point, and right, in storytelling, you can go through it, go around it, or turn back. A brand might help a person continue through that conflict, and you have to give them the information that allows them to make a decision of, does this product help me? Yes, it does. They don't care about your product story. When I'm getting on an airline, I'm not really caring very much about the United Airlines history and commitment to this and what charities they donate to. I just need a plane ticket to get where I need to go and a plane ticket to come back. And that's a conflict, and they give me enough information to make me want to take their airline. So you're right. It's all set up until they reach the conflict point, and your brand can be there. So I think in this day and age, the brand has to stop being the hub and the spoke and start being service-oriented and helping. Marketing is no longer just about selling. It's about telling.
Mm-hmm. I often break that down. The story cycle process that we work with is 10 steps, and it's designed to take people deep into their brand story so that they can understand it. But I always like to start with just the basic fundamentals, and I like to bounce it off true story artists like you. I mean, you made a living in the comic book world, and now, of course, make a living in the marketing world, and those two worlds have come together in your Clark Kent sort of way. But boil it down to, it's really as simple as a 3-act structure. You have a setup. You establish your story. You have a problem. The conflict arises, and without conflict, you have no story, because conflict is the marrow of every story. And then you have Act 3, the solution, the resolution. This is what happens. And we go through this in our minds because our minds, you hear it a million times, are hardwired for story because we are more hardwired for survival. And stories help us make meaning out of the chaos of being alive. And it basically triggers that survival mechanism. And so at its most basic level, at least to me, what I have found successful is to approach story first and foremost from that perspective? What's this? What's the setup, the context of this story? What's the problem that we are trying to help resolve? And what does that resolution look and probably even more importantly feel like to our customers? Am I oversimplifying story?
Oh my God. You can say the words oversimplifying, but you and I both know unpacking that is incredibly challenging. And there's so much detail in everything from Act 1 through Act 3. And the fact that we're not making a movie, right? This is people's lives. And people are trying to accomplish something. And just like a conflict point or the inciting incident in a movie or in a comic book, it's something that starts the story, and the conflict does define what the actual story is. But ultimately, people are not a 3-act structure, right? They might have a conflict and need a resolution, but their lives go on. Mm-hmm. And my life, as it relates to United Airlines, we don't interact right now until I need another flight. I don't care about their story. I care about my story. And we have to remember that every single one of our customers, or some sort of proxy for a customer, is the hero of their own story. And we have to treat them as the hero of their own story, and we have to give them content and resources that will resonate in their own story. But I think you're right on. And that's why I love your show. It's so spot on. You keep driving home the basics, which is conflict and resolution. And in comics, we learned, without conflict, the story is just set up. And until you introduce conflict, there's no real story. And I think, you've been preaching that, and I got to tell you, more marketers need to get this message, because they still think that they're operating in a world where if they deliver $20 million of ad banners and interruptive advertising, they're going to motivate their audience. All they're going to do is get a delivery metric. They're not going to get a behavior change.
Bob Hoffman, who is an ad guy, great ad guy out of California, out of San Francisco Bay Area. I heard him last year at Michael Gass's ad agency seminar in Nashville, and he says that you are more likely to graduate from Navy SEAL training than to click on a banner ad. And so, I agree with that. So, why is the marketing world so slow to catch on to this?
Because we were raised like that. I mean, we were raised in the idea that if people were exposed to message 7 times, they were more likely to remember, have memory and message recall. We all read Ogilvy on advertising, and then we read Wunderman's book, and then we read early books until Seth Godin came along and reminded us now that the user has power over message. Did we start to realize that this was real? But the revolution of the revolution of the digital revolution and social media revolution means that we now control all of the content that we receive. We can block out advertising. We don't open up a newspaper and then bear through the print ads. We don't just flick on the evening news and wait for the commercials to end. We now control the media. But so many people were used to just saying, well, I delivered 30 million impressions. Great. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you connected with anybody. All they're doing is broad-based, shotgun approach, 1% ROI. You know the numbers, right? We can all recite them. We all know a version of it. But what we do now is much more fulfilling, because if somebody is actively going to YouTube to watch your video, or actively going even to your own brand.com to look at an infographic or to research to make a purchase, that's a lot more effective, a lot more efficient, and a lot more powerful. You can keep throwing banner ads and interrupting people, but the diminishing returns are measurable, and you can see that it's no longer working. So bigger budgets just mean that you're able to claim, oh yeah, I have a target audience of 100,000, and we repeated the ad 7 times in front of them, and then they're going to record that was a success metric, because that's something that they can do. That's something they know and they grew up on. But I think there's a younger generation that's coming up and looking at that as something that's laughable, because they know that their generation pulls media to them, and a brand has to speak to them in a way that makes sense for them in order to want to be motivated to take a change or make a purchase or some sort of call to action.
And it manifests itself to me anyways, buddy, in the madness of putting a pre-roll commercial online and then giving the gun to the consumer, and they've got 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, you can pull the trigger and kill me, which I would imagine most people do. They want to shut that thing down and get to the content they got there for. But in whose world? David Ogilvy certainly wouldn't profess this. I am going to now give you an ad that I'm going to allow you to turn off that just basically underscores and instills in your mind how much you dislike advertising and, oh, by the way, my brand in the process. I mean, it's crazy. Why you put that up? I don't know. I still have never figured that out. There might be a book in the works somewhere that says, delete me in 5 seconds. But that's what we've done.
Would you ever play the YouTube pre-roll game? That is, you wait until it counts down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You click skip, you watch the video, and then you try to remember what that pre-roll was. And usually you can't. But
no.
I do want to note, though, and it's worth noting because I don't think all advertising is bad. In fact, there is advertising that truly resonates with people that never makes it to network and never makes it to banners. And even when you do your talk through of advertising for your sponsors, it resonates because it's on target, right? Contextually, I care about that. There is advertising that I care about. It's when an ad follows me around the internet and I've seen it, or I've made a purchase and it doesn't know that I made a purchase and it keeps following me around with the same Timberland work boots, but it keeps interrupting me. But there are certain advertising assets that people will want to consume because they're still pulling it to themselves. They get to choose. That's why sometimes you can go on YouTube and you can see that these commercials have really high view counts because people care about products. They do care about brands because those brands represent a conflict resolution for them. So I think it's the context of how we blast ads and that rule of thumb of 1% ROI is good, right? If you're going for 1 or 2% ROI, you're essentially alienating 98 to 99% of the people, which is what causes coders to write banner blocking software or causes people to click through the skip on YouTube videos. But there is sometimes good, valuable information in ads and in commercials that we are actually willing to listen to or engage with or list or watch because they matter and they'll solve a problem in our lives. I don't think all advertising is bad. I think there's just bad placement.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. They just haven't thought it through. And when it comes down to telling your story, it's not just about your story. It's, as you had said earlier, it's about your audience and where are they at? Where are they at both physically and philosophically, So where are you interrupting them or are you weaving your story into their lives? And is it in context to them? Or are you just trying to hook a fish that's swimming in the other direction?
Right. It's like movie trailers. Man, I go on and I look for movie trailers to decide what movie I'm going to go see. You can't tell me that all advertising's bad, and I need marketing software. I need design software. I need all kinds of products and solutions, but I have to do it in my own way, and I have to pull content to me. And that's when well-designed storytelling and content really matters, is when I'm looking for it, you better be ready. And I think that's where brands are often not ready. They're so busy formulating, like I said, the December message that they've forgotten that I don't care about your December message. I just have to solve a problem now.
What do you mean by December message? I haven't heard that before.
So if you think about, like, brands will do brand planning and they'll think about what their message is in each month of the year and things that they're going to say. They'll plan their social calendar. They'll look at events on the calendar. In healthcare, there's lots of healthcare awareness month content. And brands will often formulate a monthly or quarterly message that they want to get to their audience. Sometimes they do it with advertising. Sometimes they do it with opted-in email newsletters. And ultimately, the brand team spend a lot of time thinking about what they're going to say at any point in the calendar. And when you think about what the December message is, it might not resonate with your target audience unless you're having a big sale on changing your oil or something. Maybe that's the December message for a local gas station or dealership. But at the end of the day, ultimately, I don't really care as much about your December message as I care about the need that I have.
Mm-hmm. All right, we need to take a break here for a moment. Actually, we get to take a break here for a moment because our sponsors have their own stories, and without them, it would be hard. I'd be hard pressed to be bringing you Business of Story. But you talked, buddy, about story design. And what I'd like to do when we come back is dive a little bit deeper into your comic book world, understand story design both from a narrative standpoint, but a visual story design, visual storytelling, and then bring that full circle about what we can learn from your travels in that world and apply in our everyday life here as marketers trying to make a real impact in people's lives. So let's cover that, buddy, right after these messages. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here on Business of Story, then you are going to love Definitive, the email from Convince and Convert that many marketers say is the most useful resource around. Each day, the team at Convince and Convert picks a topic and sends you the 3 best resources ever created about that topic. It's topical, it's timely, it's useful, so go to definitivedigest.com and subscribe for free right now. Hey, I've got a question for you. What's the best call to action button color on your website? Yeah, you probably didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, what's the best shape and sizes of your CTA buttons? And what copy gets more clicks? You know, these questions have interrupted my sleep patterns for weeks now, until I downloaded a helpful new email marketing guide from Emma called Why We Click: The Psychology Behind a Great Call to Action. You'll learn how applying just a little bit of brain science can transform your CTA buttons into small but mighty conversion powerhouses. It covers the button color, copy, and placement that helps skyrocket click rates. Check it out at myemma.com/click. You know, Emma helps marketers everywhere send smart, stylish email newsletters, promotions, and automated campaigns, and to help us all rest a little easier knowing our email marketing is doing its job. So check out their new publication at myemma.com/click. You, like all business leaders and communicators, have an important brand story to tell, but it's probably not being heard. There's just too much competition for our attention. Unless, of course, you tell a better story. For over a year now, I have connected you with more than 50 international story artists through this podcast to help you craft your ideal brand story for the growth of your enterprise and your people. Did you know I'm also available to you for speaking engagements, brand and leadership story workshops, even for one-on-one Skype or telephone brand story strategy consults? Plus, you can begin clarifying your brand story right now by downloading the interactive DIY workbook at businessofstory.com. You see, your sales don't have to be comedies or tragedies. You can make them epic by clarifying your brand story and connecting with audiences and customers like never before. So download your workbook today at businessofstory.com. And if you're not 100% satisfied, I'll happily refund your money. And one last thought. Just remember, the most potent story you ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a good one, my friends. Story on. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest today, Buddy Scalera. He comes to us from the comic book world and pharma, big pharma advertising, marketing, and he brings those two together to help us understand how we can, I guess, really work from our left brain, right brain, and connect with the heart of a story. And, you know, Buddy, this is particularly interesting to me because growing up, I came from a world of music. I loved music. I wasn't a particularly great performer. In fact, I was nervous as hell whenever I performed. I would, literally was in the choir in high school, and I would accompany the choir, and I would get the shakes at the piano like there was no ending to it, when I had to get up and do performances. But I loved how music worked, and so I was writing songs. I mean, little ditties when I was a little kid all the way up, and I studied music composition and theory at Washington State University, got a degree in that as well as a degree in communications because I figured I could never make money in the music world, but I could probably, spin a yarn or two and make it in the advertising world. So it's this connection of commerce and creativity that comes together. I think it sounds similar to your world in that you are coming at it from the comic book side, very much on the entertaining. And, I totally get that they got to sell. There's a commerce woven throughout it. But being able to take what you've learned and apply it into, the pharmaceutical world, and we have a lot of B2B listeners here, so I'm hoping it encourages them to say, look it, man, you don't have to get just stuck in features and benefits, but now marketing, you can really have some fun with this. So what did the comic book world, and I was going to ask you too, my favorite comic book growing up was Mad Magazine. So I don't know if Alfred E. Newman is considered, a superhero, but he was to me growing up. And my mom and dad would just, hang their head in shame whenever I pulled it out. They just like, oh my God, that, leftist leaning, radical comic book. So I don't know where that falls in your world, but tell us a little bit about, okay, so how did the comic book world really refine you as a storyteller that you have now brought both visually and narrative-wise into the marketing world?
I love that you reference music, because I think that so many of us have a background where we studied a craft for years because we were passionate about it. We were high school students, applied to colleges, studied, graduated, could not wait to do it, and then we find that maybe you cannot do Shakespeare for a living, or oboe, or whatever it is. And I think what ends up happening is many creative souls go to agencies because they love that creativity and that energy. But I will say to all of my fellow creators out there, if the last time you created art, no matter what that art is because somebody passed a job bag to you, you broke a promise to the younger version of yourself. And you don't have to be good at art to do it. Kids, we praise kids not for the quality of their art, but the completion and the engagement of their art. And I think people need to fulfill themselves as creators and artists, no matter what it is, from music to painting to comics to writing. You have to keep doing your art because that makes you better at your job. Because the study and exploration of any kind of storytelling and art makes you better at your day job. And if you're waiting for somebody to pass you a job bag, I just passed it to you. Go out and create and make stuff. Every word that I've written on any panel of any comic book has made me better as a communicator and as a marketer. And I think one of the things we could learn from comic books is that there is a great similarity between comic books and web pages, right? We have words and pictures juxtaposed on a page to tell a story and to create a call to action. That's a web page, and that is a comic book. The call to action is different. In a comic book, we want you to buy an issue or turn a page. But on a website, we want you to click here. We want you to take an action. We want you to do something. We want you to convert. No matter what it is, we want you to do something. So we have to give you compelling enough imagery and text in the right amount, not too much, not too little, to make you want to take that action. And I will tell you that working in comics, we tell stories on a deadline, not when we feel like it, because you have to put a comic on a shelf every month. And, one of the bigger challenges is to create a cliffhanger ending, a reason for people to come back. And it's not like driving people back to a free website where all they have to do is move their index finger. A great comic book will get you back to the store to plunk down your $3.99 to see how that story carries on. So I think there's a lot to learn about engagement, visual excitement, economy of visual and text language, calls to action. Those are the things that we have on both websites and in comic books. And I think it would be really effective if people sat down and tried to just deconstruct what works in a medium that they love. For you, it might be music. For me, it was just comic books. I deconstructed comic books, which eventually led to me becoming an educator. I teach classes at Comic-Cons. I have 6 published books on the topics of visual storytelling. You might not know them, but the verticals of people that buy my books really love what I do in terms of visual storytelling. So I think what we did in college, we broke down what made art rather, and we learned how to make art ourselves. I think people have to go back to doing that, deconstructing, trying to understand, and then they will find ahas in their day job that they didn't even know were there.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Being true to your younger self. That is just, it's so well put. And it's so hard for us to do that often in our own line of work. We have to find ways to sneak that in. You talked about, so you went to college, you were a journalist, a writer, obviously, by trade, but you keep talking about visual storytelling. Can you tell me how you grew as a visual storyteller, and what do you mean by that? Because are you actually doing some of these illustrations, or what is your definition of visual storytelling?
Yeah, well, no, it's a great point. I think all content on the web, unless it's like haptic feedback or audio, for the most part, almost all of the content that we create is visual in some way. Text is visual. The rendering of logos and even just the treatment of text is visual. But more than 60% of the part of the brain that processes senses is devoted to visuals. And there were studies that demonstrated that we can see and identify visual content in less time than it takes to blink an eye. That's an evolutionary trait. We really do rely on visual for the web. So being good at visual content and spatial decisions depends on how well you tell a story. How much text do you need? How much imagery do you need? What colors do you need? How do you put it together to get people to do a call to action, right? This is commercial art. I'm not creating art for art's sake. I'm not making a painting or just writing a poem. I am creating art for commercial sake. And when I think about what I'm doing in comics, it's very similar to what I'm doing on websites for commercial products. I'm trying to get people to do something. So visual storytelling says you have to think about what the medium is capable of, what the expectation is. Early days with video, we just treated it like a small television set. It's not. We know it's its own medium. And what we do in comics, for example, is we say, what will tell the story with an image? Picture's worth 1,000 words, blah, 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 blah. But what will we say with text? So a good example, a great film or a great comic book will have somebody standing at a window. We don't have actual motion in comics. It's the implied motion. And then they're saying a line of dialogue. Now, you can see somebody standing at a window. You don't need the dialogue to say, hey, I'm standing at a window. You might have the line of dialogue say, I can kill him from here. So you've got to use the benefits of the medium to tell a more layered and nuanced story, right? Remember early days of buttons? Everything said, click here, because that's what people had to be told to use this visual medium. Now we learned as a society that there are clickable elements on a web page, and we even look for them. We even see when our mouse turns from an arrow to a finger. So we know how people think and how they use the web, and it's constantly evolving and changing. So you have to use those principles of saying, what can you say with an image? What can you say with text? And what will get that call to action? And that's really what it's all about.
What do you do if you're not an artist? So I'm not an artist, and I love visual art, and I do my best to kind of cobble things together when I don't have an artist at the ready. But I agree with you on the power of using the visual storytelling, especially on channels, Instagram, Twitter to stand out, Facebook. So where can we guide people to help them become better at this when they're not inherently an artist, and we keep defaulting back to horrible stock imagery?
Stock imagery, that's like, you just jabbed it like a needle through my heart. The idea that you'd use stock when you actually have employees or product shots or people using your product. I think we'll go back to the college thing. I'll tell you, I'm not an artist, and yet I write to a visual medium. Both I write to a visual medium on the web, and I write to a visual medium in comics. What I did, and I'll tell you how I did it. I deconstructed comics. And you talk about Story X. So what I did was somebody had said these two writers were particularly good at plotting, and I wanted to learn how to write comics. So I bought 3 copies of each of these writers' comics. And since comics have a left and right page, I ripped up the comics, all 22 pages. So I would have a left and right. So it took 2 issues to do that. And then I had one control where I kept like an intact issue. So I would have the reading experience. And then I, one by one, marked out where the setup was, where the inciting incident was, and where the conflict and resolution was. Now, in an ongoing series, I also had to leave room for denouement, right? So you had that cliffhanger or you had that hard ending. And I broke down what was working. And then I looked at the pages and I said, wow, on action pages, there's this many panels. And on sequences where you have a lot of dialogue, we have this going on. And yet this person is more interesting when they use these types of visuals versus this person who has people standing around in the back of their heels. And so what I did, Park, was I just sat down and I deconstructed what people were doing on the page. And by the same virtue, I look at websites and I say, what's happening on your page? What's the quote-unquote hero image on your page? What's the call to action? What do you want people to do? And really well-designed websites know how to control your eye on the page. They know that you read in mini Z patterns. They know that you move from left to right. They know certain colors. You even mention it in your promos. There are things that drive a call to action more than others, and you can study, break those down, apply them, measure them, analyze them, and then optimize them on your site. Again, it's not just about a one-time delivery of a message. It's about building a customer who will come back again and again. So I think you have to take a really academic approach on your own learning. I wanted to learn how to be a visual storyteller. I listened to people and said, these are the best. I studied their work, I deconstructed it, I invested in my own education, and then I was able to apply that process. And the process constantly evolves. But I think people have to take a more active academic approach. Listening to podcasts like yours, great way to do it because you're listening to other professionals. But nothing is quite as effective as sitting down and deconstructing something yourself until you get to a grok level understanding of it.
A grok level of understanding. I love that. So when you went back and you deconstructed these and you saw these patterns start to emerge, do you believe that these writers and publishers were following a formula, or were these just natural patterns like the hero's journey that occurs when you're telling a really compelling story? And the patterns I'm talking about is when you said, when the inciting incident happened, it had X number of frames on there and had this going on. So do you think that was intentional, or is it just the way story is kind of universally playing out?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there are certain formulaic elements, and formulaic has sometimes a negative charge, but when you consider the medium, and the medium is, on the web, you're constrained by space. That is, there's a limited amount of space in the frame of a web browser, and if not in the frame of the web browser, in a monitor. And people who are designers are sometimes on these gigantic Macintosh monitors, which give a skewed view of how much somebody can see on a laptop screen, right? On a 13 or 14-inch laptop
a
screen.
handheld for that, man. I mean, you get to your iPhone looking at something where most of the websites are viewed anyways. So
Yeah. And then, with comics, for me, somebody had said that it was formulaic, but not a bad formula. And we have 22 pages in comics per month, although it's dropping a little bit. But the reason for that was because on average, there were 22 working days in a month, and the average comic book artist could draw 1 page a day. So that's how comic books came to be 22 pages. And when you have 22 pages and a 5 or 6 issues of 22 pages will collect well into a graphic novel, or properly termed trade paperback, which you'll pick up in a bookstore or in a comic book store as a collected edition, you start to learn to write to a page count. So there's a certain amount of formulaic nature, and there's only so much space on a page, right? It's not scalable. It's not infinitely scrollable like a website. You are working with a medium that is severely constrained by the space of a printed page. You start to recognize the value of saying, okay, I'm going to learn how to write to this medium. It's the same application of writing to the web. You learn to write to that medium. You learn to write to how many characters you can include in a title bar, to a call out. Those are things that are very formulaic, but until you deconstruct the formula and understand it, you truly can't master it. Are there people who transcend it? Yeah, but that's probably more rare than it is the norm. So it's better to understand, deconstruct, and know the rules before you start to break them. And I always encourage people, really become a student of your craft, but also become a student of another craft that you're passionate about. You, music, me, comics. Have a side hustle and a passion, And that will help you later on when you deconstruct the thing that you're getting paid for on a deadline.
I think it's fascinating. I'm going to use it at the next cocktail party I'm at, is asking people, why are comic books 22 pages? And they're going to go, what do you mean? Yeah, most comic books are 22 pages. Did you know it's because the average artist could design a page in one day, and there was 22 working days in a month, and that gives you your comic book. That's really absolutely fascinating. So people write to that. Blake Snyder was a famous screenwriter who sold more screenplays in the 80s for family-friendly movies to Disney and whatever, wrote a great book called Save the Cat. I've referenced it often here.
Yep.
He talks about the screenplay, the ideal screenplay being 110 pages. And he says that's also the ideal weight of a jockey, by the way, 110 pounds apparently. But it goes back to, this needs to happen by this page, and by this page this happens. And he discovered this by driving, I think he was in Santa Barbara and having to drive into LA, back and forth commute, and he would be listening to movies as he's going and would realize that the apex of the show, the real turning point, happened about 55 pages in, or about halfway through that. And he just put this together about, it's the geography, or in this case, the number of days available to us, that actually starts creating this framework that I just think is really interesting in its own weird little grokking sort of way, I suppose. And ultimately what I'm trying to say is to be intentional about it, is to roll into a project and be intentional about truly bringing story to it in its most simplest forms, as I talked about earlier, with a beginning, middle, and an end, set up problem resolution, and then, as you were saying, getting deeper. How are you going to tell that story visually? How are you going to tell it narrative? How are they going to interact with it online? You were recently at Content Marketing World. What was the overall gist of your presentation? What was it that you were trying to get across to that crowd?
Well, I wanted them to understand that in visual storytelling, you have to start with a why. You have to ask yourself why you're creating visual content. And so often, people go immediately to infographics. Oh, we're going to make infographics. And you go like, well, why? Like, will that really help your audience to tell the story and know why? But a bigger part of the story was also to get the right people in the room. That is, both you and I profess to not being visual designers or storytellers, right? We do something else. And it's amazing that in an agency scenario, there'll be an account person in the room and maybe a project person in the room. And then other components of the content are on a need-to-know basis. And they often don't bring the creatives in until it's too late, until the strategy team has decided what they're going to do. Whereas if you get the visual storytellers in early, you change the whole paradigm of the communication. The whole shape and form of the message evolves. You're a musician, it's sort of like a committee writing a song and then bringing a musician into the very last hour and having them compose to it. It wouldn't make any sense. So spending years at Ogilvy, I was there 9.5 years, and then prior to that I was at agencies as well. I kind of compared content strategy to being asked to decorate a house. But the only view I have is through a keyhole in the front door, and I can see one room. And actually, I can't actually look through the keyhole because an account person is looking through it for me, doing their best trying to explain it, because that's how the structure is. And that's how we've always done it, right? AORs, and we always led with account people. But now I'm being asked to decorate not just the room that they can see, but the back room, the family room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the kids' rooms, the garage off the back of the house, the man cave, and maybe even determine if an addition has to be put on the house. When I move from the agency side over to the client side, I live in the house. And now I bring designers in much earlier because I can tell them what I want to accomplish, and I can explain why. And then they, with their greater understanding of how the medium works, in this case digital, social, mobile, whatever it is, they are going to help drive that part of the conversation so we get to a better outcome. And I think it's really important to know the why, but also to put the right people in the room, because traditionally, as a copywriter, I wasn't always in the room until it was time to execute.
By the way, I'm glad you threw a man cave into that metaphorical home. I feel good about that. So let's wrap up with two things. Number one, what is your most favorite comic that you got to work on? And number two, what did you learn from that particular story creation that helps inform what you do today that our listeners can take away?
Wow, no one has ever asked me that before. So I've never told this story before, but I was writing a comic book series called Deadpool, which at the time was not a big property.
Love the movie.
Yeah, the movie was
I laughed my ass off. That was
cool. They really nailed it. But at the time that I was doing it, I was work for hire. I was just one part of the team, and it was my first really big, high profile project. So it meant a lot to me, and I knew our run, me and my writing partner, our run was coming to an end, but he had to jump off one issue early, and the editor said, "Hey, do you want to write one more issue before the next team comes over?" And Park, I just had this thing in my mind where I said, I want to go out with a bang. And I felt like, after all the work that I had done leading up to that, that was the framing device that I had. I wanted to go out with something that resonated. And so I taped that to my monitor. I said, "Going Out with a Bang." And that became the title, or the working title of issue Deadpool number 56. And I was leaving with that, and I needed a twist. And I'll tell you how the twist ends so that nobody has to go and try to figure it out. Deadpool is the merc with the mouth, right? We saw Ryan Reynolds talk. And all of the different plot lines that we've been playing with in our run, the series, ended, and then I had one more chance to tie all the loose ends up. And in the end, everything falls apart for Deadpool, and he says, the merc with the mouth, chatty, he says, "For the first time in my life, I find," you turn the page, "that I'm speechless." And we end. And I felt, and people said, it was the first time they took this funny, silly comic book, and it actually meant something. It resonated with them, because I didn't give them exactly what they thought they were going to get. I gave them something that they felt was more emotional and real, and actually put a nice spin on the character. So I ended with that. So that ending, everything else I've written after that, I love and hate for so many reasons, but that one I'm most proud of, because I took a twist on a character that was not obvious.
And the lesson learned?
Have an opinion. Like, as a creator, don't just write stories to tell a story. Like, invest yourself and have an opinion, and want to say something. You might say the wrong thing, but your audience will respect you more for trying.
That's awesome. I can't think of a better thing to end with. I'm speechless.
I find that hard to believe, but...
Buddy, I can't thank you enough for being here. I mean, really a fascinating show today, and so much fun to explore into your world of the comic book world, one that I have not spent a lot of time in, short of Deadpool movie and my a Mad Magazine comic fetish back in the day. But it's just awesome to have you here, and thank you for being so generous and sharing your storytelling advice with our listeners.
Oh, and it was an honor, and I will tell you with no shame, I'm continue to be a fanboy of your show. I listen, and I lobbied to be on your show because I was like, this is great. I want to be on this. So I'm deeply grateful to you and Jess for getting me on the show. I'm so proud to be a part of your network of guests.
Oh, well, thank you for that. It's an honor to have you here. And where can people learn more about what you do?
Oh, yeah. So in my professional life, I have a personal website, buddyscalera.com, which is in desperate need of an update, as the shoemaker's children always go barefoot. I maintain a blog, a weekly blog that I update about once a month, and that's at Words Pictures Web. That's the intersection of words, pictures, and the web, so wordspicturesweb.com. And then people can find me at comicbookschool.com. That's where I have all of my comic book writing, my custom published comics that I've written for brands, and I do custom comic book writing for the brands out there that are wondering. So that's where you can find me. So buddyscalera.com, wordspicturesweb.com, and comicbookschool.com, and then all my social networks are tied in from there.
Oh, that's great. And you're more helpful than maybe you even know, because I have a mantra that I say often, and that is, this show is to help reignite within our listeners the one true superpower that we all possess, and that's the power of story to nudge the world in any direction we choose. So thank you so much for helping us do that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. If you like what you hear, certainly head over to iTunes and or Stitcher. Give us a rating, a ranking, and share it with your world. It's how we grow this particular broadcast. Really appreciate that. And of course, if we can be of service to you in any way, shape, or form in your own business storytelling, reach out to us at businessofstory.com. We have resources there ready for you to apply to your own story to reignite that superhero within you. Available for speaking engagements, workshops, or one-on-one brand consultation for either your personal brand and or your professional brand. So just let us know how we can help. Thank you again for listening. Please return next Monday when we will have another astonishing story artist like Buddy on to help you craft and tell compelling brand stories that sell. And until then, have a wonderful life.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business of Story. Don't forget there are terrific free storytelling resources for you at thebusinessofstory.com, where you'll also find the complete show archive. The Business of Story is sponsored by Emma and by Convince and Convert, and is produced by Convince and Convert Media. Find more great shows like The Business of Story at marketingpodcasts.com, the first search engine for marketing podcasts. Podcast imaging by